Pennsylvania's election lawyers have filed their response to a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of mail-in voting in the state. And my friends, we are at a crossroads. There is no good way to solve this problem right now. Either we throw out Pennsylvania as an unconstitutional election, which in my opinion it was, causing millions of people to have their votes disenfranchised and potentially igniting some kind of major conflict between whatever the political factions are, or we outright ignore the Constitution and say that we can do whatever we want because the Constitution is but a parchment of paper that means nothing. Right now, as most of you probably know, but for those that don't, there is a lawsuit currently docketed in the Supreme Court. It is challenging what's called Act 77 in Pennsylvania, a law passed in October of last year creating no excuse mail-in voting. The only problem is that Pennsylvania already has an absentee ballot provision. And when they were passing this law, they actually started the constitutional amendment process and stopped halfway, changed around some words, essentially creating the exact same law, but trying to circumvent the Constitution. In my opinion, upon reading all of this, based on reading all this, it does seem like the Republicans and basically the entire government of Pennsylvania created no excuse mail-in voting in violation of their own state constitution and essentially in violation of the U.S. Constitution, based on what's happening right now. The lawsuit was docketed with the Supreme Court, and Samuel Alito instructed the state to respond to the suit by this morning, which they did. In what may be the most shocking response I've seen, they straight up said, if you take this, you could undermine the republic. I want you to stop and think about that for a second, and then we'll read through this. We have more news too. Arizona. Several lawmakers are invoking Section 2, Article 2, Section 2, I don't know what. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, saying they have the sole power to appoint electors. So things are getting spicy. I want you to think about what they've just said in Pennsylvania. We violated our own Constitution, in turn, the U.S. Constitution. We are violating our Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. But if you dare consider this, you will undermine the republic. That is nightmarishly psychotic. But I feel like no matter which way this goes, there will be an undermining of the system to some capacity. To me, there's only one logical answer. Pennsylvania's mail-in votes must be discarded. Absolutely. It is the fault of Pennsylvania's lawmakers for disenfranchising all of these voters. But if we ignore the Constitution or rule that it's better to uphold pretense than the actual Constitution, supreme law of the land, then we will not have a republic. And that's the scary reality. Let me read to you from Law and Crime. PA election lawyers urge Justice Alito to reject one of the most dramatic disruptive cases of all time. Perhaps. But think about that. You, the state, the Pennsylvania, including Republicans, are the ones who fractured and broke your own election in violation of your own Constitution. You had no right to do so. In fact, I think all of these individuals in Pennsylvania should sue you for damages or do something. Here's what they say. Lawyers representing the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on Tuesday morning filed court papers before U.S. Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito to oppose a lawsuit filed by U.S. Rep. Mike Kelly, a Republican from that state who zealously supports President Donald Trump. Kelly's lawsuit argues that Pennsylvania's Supreme Court violated the U.S. Constitution when it failed to rule recently that the state election law violated the Pennsylvania Constitution. In Kelly's view, Pennsylvania's bipartisan decision to expand the use of mail-in ballots via 2019, a law known as Act 77, conflicts with more narrow absentee voter provisions contained in the state constitution. In summary, Kelly's case seeks basically to flip the election in Trump's favor in Pennsylvania. The Commonwealth attorneys minced no words in a scathing opening paragraph. Now, I want to point out, Sean Parnell, who is also party to this lawsuit, a plaintiff, I spoke with him and he said their goal is not to overturn the results. They want the courts to determine what proper relief would be. But I think they're right. There is a provision in the Pennsylvania Constitution about what an absentee vote is. You can vote by mail under specific circumstances. They're trying to use a semantic argument to get around their own constitution, violating the rights of their citizens. That's their fault, not anyone else's. Now, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania shot this down, saying you didn't file soon enough. I think that's insane. If you don't know it exists, how can you set a deadline on whether someone should know it exists? That makes no sense. If you discover right now there's a constitutional violation, it should be heard by the courts. More importantly, Mike Kelly won his race. He will be negatively impacted no matter what if there is relief to be found. Well, I suppose if they say the election stands, but we're going to do a constitutional amendment moving forward, he would still win his case. But he's risking tremendous damage to his own personal career. Here's what the state said. Petitioners, Kelly and others, ask this court to undertake one of the most dramatic, disruptive invocations of judicial power in the history of the republic. No court has ever issued an order nullifying a governor's certification of presidential election results, and for good reason. Once the door, quote, once the door is open to judicial invalidation of presidential election results, it'll be awfully hard to close that door again. The loss of public trust in our constitutional order resulting from the exercise of this kind of judicial power will be incalculable. They say, once the door is opened to judicial invalidation. My friends, you did that. You did that. They were amending the Constitution to create mail-in voting and stopped halfway. They knew they were violating the Constitution of their state. And now they would dare say that Samuel Alito, by taking the case to the Supreme Court, would be the ones actually committing the damage? No, they would be rectifying and healing the damage, which is why the damage has been done. There is no ruling by which we get a clean way out. Either they say, Pennsylvania, F you, you screwed this up. That's on you. And you'll have millions of people outraged. And they should be outraged at their own state, Republicans and Democrats alike. Or they say, you know what, you're right. We refuse to actually provide relief to this unconstitutional action by the state. You know what that would mean? It would mean in the future, state legislatures or governors or courts could issue rulings that completely violate the U.S. Constitution. And then the courts are going to say, well, we don't want to cause some kind of a ruckus, so we're just going to allow unconstitutional edict. That is a nightmare. They're going to say the response in opposition highlights the severity of the relief Kelly seeks, while simultaneously scuttling the way his lawyers pressed their case. Kelly's claims, the Commonwealth says, are not of the utmost constitutional gravity, but are instead fundamentally frivolous. According to the Commonwealth, Kelly's lawyers failed to explain how a remedy premised on massive disenfranchisement would accord with the due process clause, which requires the counting of votes cast in reasonable reliance on existing election rules as implemented and described by state officials. The Constitution. Let me explain it for you. You can't just come out a year before an election, say, we are going to completely ignore and disregard the actual election rules codified in the Constitution, and then say, oh, but we described it this way so we can do it. No. We refer to the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, and I assume Pennsylvania does that for their state as well. I don't see it. Look, I'm not a lawyer. Alito might say, you're right. We cannot upend this election because it would rip apart this country. Maybe. Or maybe they'll say, nice try, nice attempt at ripping apart this country. It's not going to work. They say, quote, nor do Kelly's lawyers seek to square their position with the separation of powers, the 12th Amendment, or basic principles of federalism, all of which foreclose the injunctive relief that petitioners seek here. Its lawyers also picked apart the way Kelly's attorneys made their argument, saying, the first question, which seeks to raise elections and electors clause challenges to Act 77, is not actually presented by this case. And the second question, which argues that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court violated the First and 14th Amendments in its application of laches, asks this court to constitutionalize huge swaths of state procedural law without any credible basis in constitutional principles or this court's precedents. Oh, please spare me. The judges can make the rulings that they want. They then trolled Kelly's legal team with words from the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in a recent Trump decision, saying, these failings also explain why equity stands as an insuperable obstacle to petitioner's application. Quote, democracy depends on counting all lawful votes promptly and finally, not setting them aside without weighty proof. The public must have confidence that our government honors and respects their votes. Full stop. You violated the Constitution, and this argument, in my opinion, has no bearing on whether or not from the start of this, you broke the rules. Yes, lawful votes. Thank you for including that word. Now, we're trying to determine whether or not the votes were lawful and should be counted, not whether or not there's proof of fraud like this other or observation was impacted. We're talking about whether or not the people who filed mail-in votes have cast lawful votes. If the Supreme Court wants to rule on that, that's incumbent upon the Supreme Court. They say petitioners would throw all of that to the wind after waiting over a year to challenge Act 77. Full stop. No. You're operating under the assumption that they knew you were violating the Constitution. So please spare me. They say, and engaging in procedural gamesmanship along the way, they come to this court with unclean hands and ask it to disenfranchise an entire state. They make that request without any acknowledgement of the staggering upheaval, turmoil, and acrimony it would unleash. In ensuing equitable relief, the court rightly seeks to avoid inflaming social disorder. So to say that the public interest militates against petitioners would be a grave understatement. Their suit is nothing less than an affront to constitutional democracy. It should meet a swift and decisive end. A lot of assumptions here. Now, of course, they're going to make their arguments, and I respect their right to do so. But I'm sorry. Mike Kelly is going to lose, or they'll have to do a new election. He won his race. If they say these votes are unconstitutional, then here's what would really help the Republicans. If they nullify mail-in voting, Republicans sweep everything. If they say we nullify the entire election due to an unconstitutional process where all votes were not counted, then everyone gets hurt. Mike Kelly is potentially sacrificing his own career for this one. So you're going to have to try again on them waiting to the last minute. Republicans have been complaining about mail-in voting for quite some time. And as the Republican legislature stated in Pennsylvania, they didn't realize that by passing no excuse mail-in voting, the Democrats, the courts, the Secretary of State, the governor would create a whole bunch of crazy rules around it, like extending voting deadlines and ballot curing. That flies in the face of what they intended. Law and Crime says, the Commonwealth further argued in support of its election law scheme. The mail-in voting system, created by Act 77, requires voters to apply for a ballot from the Voters' County Board of Elections. A voter must provide proof of identification when requesting a ballot and will not be sent a ballot unless approved as a qualified voter. The Commonwealth further said that Act 77 pertains to mail-in ballots, not absentee ballots. A distinction, it says, Kelly erroneously blurs. Will the Supreme Court agree that mail-in voting is fundamentally different from absentee voting? Maybe. Maybe that what they're saying is the definition of absentee voting has to do with you not being available to vote in person. But doesn't the Pennsylvania Constitution say that when you're voting in person, here's how you do it? Creating mail-in voting. Here's the general breakdown. Absentee voting is how you vote by mail. No excuse mail-in voting is what they called it, meaning it's essentially creating an easy path for anybody to vote absentee or the equivalent of. I don't think the semantics matter. I think the Constitution lays out a process by which you're voting by mail because you're not coming in person, and a process by which you're voting in person. The fact that they were seeking to amend the Constitution and then stopped, changed it from absentee to mail-in, shows they're trying to play a semantic game with what is actually allowed. And they've been doing this quite some time. In Pennsylvania, Donald Trump's legal team sued, saying that they didn't have any observers with meaningful access to the vote count. And a judge actually ruled, well, so long as you're in the building, it counts as observing. Seriously. They are playing dirty games to cheat and steal, in my opinion. Mail-in voting is absentee. Universal mail-in voting is basically absentee, but is substantially less secure. So there's that argument, I suppose. For the longest time, we were saying absentee and universal mail-in voting were different. But absentee is voting by mail, and that's what the mainstream media kept saying. When Trump was challenging mail-in voting, they kept saying, Trump votes by mail all the time. No. Trump votes absentee. You see the difference? Well, if the media wants to play the game and say they're the same thing, I don't see how the courts or the Democrats in Pennsylvania can come out and now say they're totally different. No. I can come out now and say the difference was always universal mail-in voting where everybody gets a ballot versus absentee voting with a chain of custody. It sounds like their system of mail-in voting is identical to absentee. All they did was create a law changing one word, absentee, to mail-in, or to a couple words, so that they could bypass the Constitution and create an expanded mail-in voting system. They say the response also slams Kelly's attorneys for relying on antiquated cases which pertain to earlier versions of the Pennsylvania Constitution and failed to properly argue that the Constitution had since been amended. Perhaps they'll lose on this one. But I'll tell you, we got a lot going on. Trump asks Pennsylvania House Speaker for help overturning election results, personally intervening in a third state. They say The calls, confirmed by House Speaker Brian Cutler's office, make Pennsylvania the third state where Trump has directly attempted to overturn a result since he lost the election to former Vice President Joe Biden. He previously reached out to Republicans in Michigan, and on Saturday he pressured Georgia Governor Brian Kemp in a call to try to replace that state's electors. The legislature in Georgia has tried convening a special session. Brian Kemp has said no, which is shocking because he's a Republican, and it's not his responsibility to determine what the special session will come out with. He can just grant them the special session, the emergency. He said no. He didn't care. That to me is surprising. But what we're seeing now is particularly fascinating. Notably, that Arizona's Republican Party, many individuals are invoking Article 2, Section 1. Take a look at this from Daniel McCarthy for Arizona. He says, Vice President Pence, I, Daniel McCarthy, have a signed letter from Arizona legislators invoking Article 2, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution. We have a contested outcome in Arizona. Section 1 of the Constitution. Is it? Okay, I was saying Article 2, Section 1. It's Section 1, Article 2, I guess. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for two persons, of whom one at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves, and they shall make a list of persons. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong portion. Section 1. So they say, each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. The state legislators have the right to choose. If they are trying to contest the results and hold a session, it doesn't matter if the governor says yes or no. And I've pointed this out many, many times. We are seeing things get ever so spicy. You see, in Pennsylvania, I bring up Arizona because I want to show you it's more than one state. We also have Georgia. They're calling for a special session. 75 people signed this letter where they basically call into they call the election in dispute, saying, for these reasons. Well, actually, let me read a little bit more. 3 U.S.C. Section 15 empowers Congress to reject electoral votes that are not regularly given or lawfully certified. The aforementioned conduct has undermined the lawful certification of Pennsylvania's delegation to the Electoral College. For these reasons, we, the undersigned members of the Pennsylvania General Assembly, urge you to object and vote to sustain such objection to the Electoral College votes received from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania during the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. So today may be the safe harbor deadline with many lawsuits and crazy stories flying around, but it's far from over. Now, apparently, I don't know how many people, but some of these people are claiming they didn't sign this or they didn't want to sign it. I'm not entirely sure because I can't get a solid number. Politico just said many said they didn't sign it. So 75 individuals, maybe it's less. Maybe, and regardless, you right now have Republicans suing in Pennsylvania. They get shot down. They go to the Supreme Court. You now have their election lawyers arguing that what they're doing is constitutional. But at the same time, members of the General Assembly saying this is not lawfully certified. I don't see how any sane person looks at this and says, no, there's no dispute. You're good to go. They have to resolve their disputes by today. If they don't, I don't see how they will have the electoral votes go to the Electoral College to make that vote. Because, well, who's going to vote? You've got two different slates of electors. The states can certify, but if they're in dispute, then why can't the other electors go and certify? The governors and secretary of states don't choose who the electors are. The state legislatures do. And if they choose Republicans in defiance of everything the state has done, then it stands to reason the election was pointless. Look, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I'll tell you. How could you look at the lawsuit currently in the Supreme Court, this letter of 75 signatures, and say, Pennsylvania has a clean election, we know the results? We don't. There is a disputed election. How can you say the same for Arizona or Georgia even? Because of the lawsuits there and because of the legislators who are challenging the results. I don't think you can. In which case, I don't see how they cast these votes. Now, look, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, as I've said it many times before, and it may just be that because they didn't resolve the disputes, some are arguing, I guess on the left, the Republicans have to win. What they're saying is the results in these states are certified, meaning the electors are ready to go. The Republicans are challenging it, and today's their last day to resolve the dispute. Otherwise, the certified electors are certainly going out. I don't necessarily think so. But I also want to point out, for one, I'm not entirely confident Trump's going to win anything out of this. And I mean it. But also, 75 General Assemblymen on the Republican side is not the majority of the General Assembly. So will the Supreme Court or the federal courts even acknowledge? And they might say, look, we get that you're the state legislature and you ultimately are the ones who decide, but you don't even have a majority of the people signing these letters. Maybe that doesn't matter, because maybe the Supreme Court will say you need to have a session where you vote on this. And maybe then the Texas lawsuit causes this delay. I'll tell you one more thing. It is in the self-interest of the Supreme Court to make sure Donald Trump wins. And this is where things get interesting. If the Supreme Court rules and they do it fairly and without regard to their own careers, and it helps Biden, they will pack the courts. They will add 4 more justices, diluting the power of the existing Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has to realize that. They'll become another legislative body by appointment. And then eventually we'll have people saying we should vote for our Supreme Court justices, like we've done with senators. That's where we're headed. If the Supreme Court wants to actually retain some kind of authority in this country, then they're obligated to reject Joe Biden. But they can't just do that. So as many have suggested, they might secretly, within their heart of hearts, say, I'm ruling against this no matter what, but create a legal reason for doing so and just agree with Republicans. At the end of all of this, it's really just about perception and power. For real. Supreme Court's going to end up picking. We'll see how it plays out. But we've got even bigger news, my friends. The next segment coming up at 4 p.m. Looking at this news that's coming out about China, Chinese spies, and a video of a Chinese, I guess he's a professor, bragging how they've essentially compromised the United States at the highest levels, except for Trump. Says to me that, Biden is compromised and we're on the verge of being subjugated by China and being servants to them. No joke. That's going to be at 4 p.m. You want to watch it? Here's what you do. First, subscribe, hit the like button, hit the notification bell. Go to the top URL bar, all right, and type in youtube.com/Timcast. Just do it. Press enter. All right, if you didn't press enter, then you're still here. But if you do, you'll go to my other channel. You can just search for Tim Pool on YouTube, and you'll see there's a different channel, and that's how you get there. I'll leave it there. That segment will be up at 4. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.